Imagine a desolate stretch of beach road, wind whipping across the dunes, and a secret buried just beneath the sand. This isn't the opening of a horror movie. It's the real-life setting for one of America's most haunting and complex unsolved cases, the Long Island serial killer. For over a decade, this story has been a chilling puzzle of missing people, mysterious phone calls, and a string of discoveries that terrified a community and baffled law enforcement. It all started in May 2010. A young woman named Shannon Gilbert, working as an escort, made a frantic 23-minute 911 call from a client's home in the gated community of Oak Beach, Long Island. In the call, she was terrified, repeatedly screaming, "They're trying to kill me." Then, she vanished into the night. The search for Shannon began. 7 months later, in December 2010, a police officer and his canine partner were conducting a training exercise along Ocean Parkway, just a few miles from where Shannon was last seen. But what they found wasn't Shannon. Instead, the dog uncovered a skeleton, wrapped in burlap. Over the next few days, the search intensified, and the discoveries became more and more horrifying. 3 more bodies were found, all female, all wrapped in the same coarse material, spaced about 500 feet apart along the same stretch of road. The victims were later identified as Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Lynn Costello, and Megan Waterman. All were petite women in their 20s, all had worked as escorts using websites like Craigslist, and all had been missing for some time. The media dubbed them the Gilgo 4, and the chilling reality began to sink in. A serial killer was using the desolate coastline of Long Island as a dumping ground. The investigation exploded. As police scoured the area, the body count grew. By the spring of 2011, a total of 10 sets of human remains had been found along Ocean Parkway. In addition to the Gilgo 4, there was Jessica Taylor, another young woman whose partial remains had been found years earlier, with the rest discovered now. There was also an unidentified Asian male, a toddler, and the toddler's mother, known as Peaches due to a tattoo. The victims were diverse, but the pattern of disposal suggested a predator who knew this remote area intimately. Let's talk about the chilling connections. Before her disappearance, Melissa Barthelemy's teenage sister received a series of taunting, torturous phone calls from Melissa's own phone. The caller, a man, was cruel and degrading. He claimed to have killed her. Police traced these calls to bustling, high-traffic areas in New York City, including Madison Square Garden and Times Square, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint the caller in the crowds. It was a brazen act, a killer who seemed to enjoy the psychological torment he inflicted on his victims' families. He was hiding in plain sight. And what about Shannon Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance started it all? A year after the search began, her remains were finally found in a dense, swampy marsh not far from where she made that desperate 911 call. Her death was officially ruled an accidental drowning, a result of hypothermia and disorientation after running into the marsh, but her family never believed it. They were convinced she was another victim of the killer, that her panic was justified, and that something or someone chased her to her death. The debate over her case continues to this day. Was she the catalyst that exposed a serial killer, or was she his victim as well? The investigation itself was fraught with challenges and controversy. Theories swirled. Was the killer local? A fisherman, a seasonal resident, someone with a deep knowledge of law enforcement techniques, allowing him to evade capture for so long. One of the most explosive theories pointed inward, suggesting a potential connection to law enforcement itself. This theory gained traction due to a few unsettling details. First, the former Suffolk County Police Chief, James Burke, actively blocked the FBI from participating in the investigation for years. Why would a police chief turn away the nation's top investigative agency in a case of this magnitude? Later, Burke was arrested and imprisoned on unrelated charges of corruption and obstruction of justice for assaulting a man who had stolen a bag from his car. What was in that bag that he was so desperate to protect? Many have speculated it contained evidence linking him to the very world the Gilgo Beach victims were a part of. While no direct link to the murders was ever proven, the suspicion cast a long, dark shadow over the entire investigation. For more than a decade, the case went cold. Families waited for answers, the public remained on edge, and the identity of the Long Island serial killer, or LISK, remained a terrifying mystery. The 10 victims found along Ocean Parkway were a haunting testament to a killer's reign of terror. It felt like a story without an ending, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Then, in July 2023, a stunning breakthrough occurred. A suspect was arrested. Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect living in Massapequa Park, just across the bay from where the bodies were found, was taken into custody. Heuermann was a married father of two who commuted to his architecture firm in Manhattan every day. He was, by all accounts, a man hiding in plain sight. So how did they finally catch him? The answer lies in a combination of old-fashioned police work and modern technology. A new task force revisited the case in 2022. They focused on a key piece of evidence, a Chevrolet Avalanche pickup truck that a witness had seen at one of the victim's homes around the time of her disappearance. They cross-referenced vehicle registration records and zeroed in on Heuermann. From there, the evidence began to stack up. They analyzed cell phone tower data, creating a digital shadow that allegedly placed Heuermann's burner phones in the same locations as the victim's phones at critical times. They also found disturbing, incriminating searches on his devices, including queries for details about the victims, their families, and the ongoing investigation. The taunting calls made to Melissa Barthelomew's sister were traced to locations consistent with Heuermann's office in Midtown Manhattan. But the final, damning piece of evidence was DNA. Investigators retrieved a pizza box that Heuermann had discarded in a trash can outside his Manhattan office. The DNA from a leftover pizza crust was a match to a male hair found on the burlap used to wrap one of the victims, Megan Waterman. The connection was made. The phantom who had haunted Long Island for over a decade finally had a name and a face. Rex Heuermann was initially charged with the murders of Melissa Bartholomew, Amber Costello, and Megan Waterman, 3 of the original Gilgo 4. He has pleaded not guilty to these charges. Later, he was also charged with the murder of the 4th victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. The evidence against him continues to be presented, painting a picture of a meticulous, yet taunting, predator who allegedly led a disturbing double life. The arrest has brought a sense of relief to many, but it hasn't answered all the questions. Heuermann has only been charged in connection with the Gilgo 4. What about the other 6 victims found along Ocean Parkway? The toddler, her mother, the Asian man, and the others. Were they victims of the same killer, or is there another predator, or even multiple killers, still out there? The investigation is far from over. For the families of those other victims, the wait for justice continues. The Long Island serial killer case is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath the surface of an ordinary community. It's a story of determined investigators, grieving families who never gave up hope, and the slow, grinding path to justice. And while one chapter may be closing, the full story of what happened on that desolate stretch of Ocean Parkway is still being written. Thank you so much for watching. This case is incredibly complex, and there are so many details we couldn't cover. What are your thoughts on this case? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime mysteries. Stay safe out there. The room went silent when the analyst finished speaking. Detective Michael Torres stared at the screen, the glow of the computer monitor reflecting in his eyes. On it was a call log extracted from the damaged burner phone found near Ocean Parkway. Multiple outgoing calls, different numbers, different nights. But every single one connected to women who had later disappeared, and one number didn't belong to a victim. It belonged to someone with a Suffolk County Police Department employee ID. The name attached to the number was Daniel Hargrove. A patrol officer, Torres leaned back slowly, the weight of the discovery settling in. In a case already drowning in theories and dead ends, accusing a police officer was like lighting a fuse inside the department itself. But the evidence was sitting right there on the screen. Torres rubbed his forehead and said quietly, "We don't move on this until we know exactly what we were looking at." Because if Hargrove was involved, this wasn't just a serial killer investigation anymore. It was something far more dangerous. The next 48 hours were tense. Torres and two federal agents quietly began reviewing Hargrove's background. On the surface, his record was clean. 8 years on the force. Solid evaluations, no disciplinary flags. But when they looked deeper, small cracks started to appear. Hargrove had worked patrol shifts that frequently covered areas along Ocean Parkway. He also owned a small fishing boat docked near Oak Beach, and the most unsettling detail of all, his cell phone had pinged near the exact locations where 2 of the victims were last seen alive. Still, Torres knew that coincidence alone wasn't enough to accuse a cop of serial murder. Then the financial records came back, and the pattern became harder to ignore. Over the past decade, Hargrove had made a series of cash withdrawals that investigators couldn't easily explain, small amounts at first, then larger ones, always spaced out, always untraceable. But the real break came from a completely different direction. One of the victim's sisters had been holding onto something for years. Melissa Barthelomew's younger sister had received disturbing phone calls after Melissa disappeared. The caller mocked her, taunted her, spoke about Melissa in chilling detail. The calls had stopped years earlier, but the sister had kept the voicemail recordings. When detectives ran the audio through voice comparison software, the results weren't perfect, but they were close enough to send a chill through the room. The voice shared characteristics with Daniel Hargrove. Torres didn't say anything for a long moment, because if that match held up, it meant the killer hadn't just been hiding in the shadows, he'd been wearing a badge. But the deeper they looked into Hargrove, the stranger things became. According to GPS logs from his patrol vehicle, there were multiple gaps in his recorded patrol routes, hours at a time when the system showed no location data. One of those gaps happened on the exact night another victim vanished. Torres finally convinced the task force to authorize surveillance, but they moved carefully. If Hargrove was innocent, the damage to the department would be catastrophic, and if he was guilty, confronting him too early could make him disappear forever. For weeks, unmarked cars watched his movements. Agents tracked where he went after his shifts ended. Most nights, he drove home to a quiet suburban neighborhood like any other officer finishing a long day. But sometimes, he didn't. Sometimes he drove toward the coast. Late at night, Ocean Parkway. On one of those nights, Torres followed at a distance as Hargrove's pickup truck rolled slowly down the same stretch of highway where the bodies had been found. The road was empty. Wind rattled the marsh grass. Hargrove pulled onto a narrow dirt shoulder and turned off his headlights. For several minutes, he just sat there. Then he stepped out of the truck and walked into the darkness. Torres waited in the car, watching through binoculars. Hargrove disappeared into the tall brush along the roadside. The same brush where investigators had uncovered multiple victims. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When Hargrove finally returned to the truck, he was carrying something small. A black plastic bag. Torres felt his pulse spike. But before he could act, Hargrove drove away. The task force debated whether to move in immediately. But Torres wanted more. He wanted proof that would hold up in court. So the following night, they returned to the exact spot where Hargrove had walked into the marsh. Search teams carefully combed through the grass under floodlights. For nearly 2 hours, they found nothing. Then one of the forensic technicians called out, "Detective, you need to see this." Half buried beneath a tangle of reeds was a small metal box. Inside the box were several items sealed in plastic: photographs, driver's licenses, jewelry, all belonging to women who had disappeared. But at the bottom of the box was something that made Torres' stomach drop. A photograph taken from inside a car. The image showed a woman standing under a streetlight, looking directly toward the camera, alive. The timestamp on the photo read May 1st, 2010. Just hours before Shannon Gilbert made her frantic 911 call. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the victim. It was the reflection in the car window, because the man holding the camera wasn't Daniel Hargrove. It was someone else entirely, someone whose face Detective Torres recognized instantly. The same wealthy doctor from Oak Beach, the man who had claimed he barely knew Shannon Gilbert. The dark waves of the Atlantic crash against miles of empty shoreline. Somewhere out there, secrets are buried in the sand. Before we uncover what investigators believe may be the final truth behind the Long Island serial killer, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you think really happened. Because this case, this nightmare, still haunts New York to this day. By early 2012, the discovery of 11 sets of human remains along Gilgo Beach had already turned the investigation into one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in American history. But the case had stalled. Years passed, leads dried up. Tips flooded in but rarely led anywhere useful. The families of the victims were losing hope, and the killer, whoever he was, remained invisible. Detectives revisited everything: phone records, online escort ads, hotel logs, surveillance footage, old interviews. But the deeper they looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Every victim had lived a dangerous life on the margins of society, advertising escort services online, meeting strangers alone, and disappearing into the night. This made them tragically easy targets. But investigators began to notice something chilling. The killer wasn't careless. He was methodical, organized, patient. He contacted victims through burner phones. He used fake names. He never kept them long. And after the murders, he disposed of the bodies in the same remote stretch of marshland along Ocean Parkway, a place hidden by thick brush and isolated dunes, a place only someone familiar with the area would know. That realization changed everything. The killer likely lived nearby or worked nearby. Someone who drove Ocean Parkway often enough to know exactly where he could dump bodies without being seen. And then another disturbing clue surfaced. Several victims had been contacted by a man using a specific pattern in his calls. He would call repeatedly, short conversations, then long silences, almost as if he enjoyed the psychological control. In one haunting case, the killer even called the victim's family after the disappearance, taunting them, mocking them. The voice on the phone sounded calm, cold, almost amused. Investigators traced those calls to crowded locations across Manhattan, Times Square, Penn Station, places packed with people, places where a man could disappear instantly. The killer wasn't just careful, he was confident, too confident. But then, years later, something happened that shook the investigation again. A new task force reopened the case with modern forensic technology. Old evidence was re-examined. DNA samples that once meant nothing were tested again. And this time, something appeared. A tiny piece of genetic material recovered from the burlap used to wrap one of the victims. The DNA pointed to a male, but the sample was incomplete, not enough for a direct match. So investigators tried something different. They turned to genetic genealogy, the same technique used to solve the famous case of the Golden State Killer. The process was slow, painstaking. They uploaded the DNA profile into public genealogy databases. Then waited. Weeks turned into months. Then finally, a distant family connection appeared. Not the killer himself, but a relative. From there, investigators began building a massive family tree. Hundreds of names, dozens of branches, and eventually, one name rose to the surface. A man who had lived on Long Island during the years the victims disappeared. A man whose job gave him knowledge of architecture, construction, and remote locations. A man who often traveled between Manhattan and Long Island, the exact path the killer's phone calls followed. And suddenly the profile matched. Middle-aged, local, technically skilled, quiet, invisible. But before investigators could move in, something terrifying happened. Another set of remains was discovered, not far from the original dumping grounds. Different victim, same location. The discovery sent shockwaves through the task force. Because if the new remains were connected, it meant the killer might never have stopped. Even after all the media coverage, even after the massive investigation, which raised a chilling question, had the killer been watching the investigation the entire time? Following every news report, every press conference, smiling quietly as detectives searched in the wrong places? Investigators began surveillance on the man whose name had surfaced through genealogy. They tracked his movements, his phone records, his internet activity. What they found sent a chill through the entire task force. Search history tied to escort sites, repeated searches about the Long Island serial killer case, and dozens of searches asking the same disturbing question: has the Gilgo beach killer been caught? The suspect wasn't just following the case, he was obsessed with it. Almost like he wanted to know how close the police were getting. And then, late one night, investigators obtained a crucial warrant. Inside the suspect's home, they hoped to find the truth that had eluded them for decades. For the families of the victims, the moment felt unreal. For nearly 20 years, the killer had been nothing more than a shadow. A voice on a phone, a ghost leaving bodies along the beach. But now, they might finally know who he was. Yet when detectives entered the house and began searching the rooms, they found something no one expected. A hidden collection, photographs, burner phones, old newspaper clippings about the Gilgo Beach murders, and one item investigators would later describe as the most chilling discovery of the entire case, because it suggested the killer had been keeping a record. A private archive, documenting everything, every victim, every disappearance, every body left in the sand. And suddenly the nightmare became clear. The Long Island serial killer wasn't just hunting victims. He had been watching the entire world search for him, for more than 2 decades. And the most terrifying part, even after the arrest that followed, even after the evidence stacked higher and higher, some investigators still believe one horrifying possibility. The man they caught may not have been working alone. And if that's true, then somewhere out there, another killer may still be walking free. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories.